Okay, since Dr. Shepard has a hard deadline, we have some other things that we have to get to as well. I'm going to go ahead and get started. People usually start trickling in within a couple of minutes. So our speaker for this evening is the one and only Dr. Marshall Shepard, a very prominent international weather and climate expert. Let's see, gosh. Professor at University of Georgia, the director of the atmospheric science program there, senior contributor to Forbes, 2013 AMS president, host of Weather Geeks. There's a long list of accomplishments and titles and whatnot. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Marshall.
Thank you so much, Amanda, and thank you for the opportunity. And yeah, I know how these things go. I mean, people kind of will pop in when they pop in, and it's like, well, I'm happy to talk to whoever's here. So, I want to thank Amanda. As many of you may know, Amanda was one of my doctoral students at the University of Georgia, and now she's out flourishing and doing her own thing. So I'm always, as an academic father, very proud to sort of see my students go off and be successful on their own. So when Amanda actually invited me to talk, I actually had a couple of different ideas that I sort of floated by her, but then I kind of settled on kind of a talk that I give from time to time that kind of wraps up many of the things that I'm thinking about these days. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Share. Okay, and then I'll put it in slideshow. We'll start. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. So this is actually a talk that I give occasionally that really wraps up a lot of what I'm up to in many ways into one talk, and gives a little bit of my science, a little bit of my background along the way, and just some of my broader perspectives. And so I call this Dr. Marshall Shepard in 21 pictures. So it's perhaps one of the few talks that you might see that has no or very little in the way of text, because they're pictures, but they're stories and messages and science along the way with those pictures. So I'll get started by just kind of giving a shout out to the inspiration for the person that sort of got me going in science. This is Dr. George Washington Carver. I don't know how many of you are familiar with who he is, but he was a scientist at Tuskegee Institute who did all kinds of things with the peanut. As a kid growing up, I didn't know any scientists, didn't have any scientists around me, but I had the library. And so I was very familiar with the books of Dr. Carver. And so I just read voraciously about the things that he did. And so it really spearheaded one of the first lessons that I share with others, which is find inspiration where you can. Because again, in the sort of lower to middle income sort of environment that I grew up with, there weren't scientists around. So I had to kind of find scientists where I could. Another sort of lesson along the way in my career is course correction. And I've had several course corrections along the way. And this honeybee is sort of the first real major course correction in my life, because I wanted to be an entomologist when I was 4th or 5th grade. I used to be in the yard catching insects and bees, and I got stung by one. And I found out I almost died because I was highly allergic to bee stings. And 6th grade science project was coming around, first time we were doing science projects. And I said, I need a plan B, pun intended, because I don't want to get stung again. So I started making weather instruments from just things we had around the house, rain gauges made from mason jars and funnels, or anemometers made from balsam wood and ping pong balls cut in half. And so I won the 6th grade science fair with that project. And literally from that point on, I was bitten by the weather bug. And so I think that was really the first course correction in my career. And there have been others. From that point on, I started researching who had really good meteorology programs. And at the time in the state of Georgia, I grew up in Georgia, neither University of Georgia nor Georgia Tech had undergraduate programs, but Florida State did. And it was fairly close, 4.5, 5 hours away. So luckily I chose that because Florida State obviously is a really good meteorology school. And so the rest is history. So there is, I don't know how many of you, and maybe even you have some people in your chapter there that are Florida State alum or have some exposure to Florida State, but there's the Love Building. That's the building where I spent many a day and night at Florida State. That's the meteorology building, or it was at that time. They have a brand new Earth, Atmosphere, and Ocean Sciences building now. But for those of a certain age that went to Florida State, this is where we spent much of our time, at the Love Building. As I give this talk, I have to give a nod to all of my mentors along the way. They all have their own sordid histories, good and bad and so forth, but I just take good from them. Peter Ray was my advisor at Florida State. He was really the one that opened up a lot of the doors, first introduced me to Joanne Simpson and Franco Einaudi at NASA, made the phone call that allowed me to ultimately end up working at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center for 12 years. I started out working with Joanne and other colleagues on the TRIM mission, ended up being the deputy project scientist for the Global Precipitation Measurement Mission, or GPM. And then along the way, Dr. Warren Washington also was a key mentor of mine. Much of my sort of advice that I give to people like Amanda and others came from many of long talks and phone calls with Warren Washington. So I know many of you can appreciate the value and importance of mentors. Here's the TRIM mission. I always kind of hark back to this satellite mission because this is where I cut my teeth as a young scientist. Now, I did have one research experience before NASA. Even as an undergraduate, I was an NWS Met Tech. I think it was a GS4 or 5. I don't even know what the GS level was, but I actually did work for the National Weather Service for a short period of time on an undergraduate project with Charlie Paxton at the National Weather Service Ruskin office. At that time in the late 80s, we were looking at RADAP2 data. This was a precursor to the NexRad WSR88D, and we were looking at signatures in Ecotop and VIL, and that would give us an indication of thunderstorm, gust, and tornadic and hail activity in the state of Florida. So from there, my first real research centered around the tropical rainfall measuring mission, and my science kind of went in a couple of different directions. I'm in many circles known for my work in urban hydrometeorological processes, this idea of building on some of the legacy research from Metromex and others that urban environments can either initiate or create their own thunderstorms. So this is a figure from a paper of ours recently around Atlanta. We looked at the combined gauge radar product, Jordan McLeod and I, over the, 20 years of warm season, or 15, I can't remember which paper this is, but we found this sort of prevalent over and downwind anomaly in precipitation that we've seen in many of our studies over the years, and not just for Atlanta, many places around the world, in fact. And so we've built on that work from a modeling and observational perspective for many years. We are actually working on a NASA interdisciplinary project now looking at predictability of these types of storms and better representation of the urban land surface in NASA regional models and even some of their global models. So this was the work that ultimately landed me with a PCASE award at the White House and the Helmut Landsberg Award, this sort of long-term work that I've done on urban hydrometeorological processes. More recently, and even in the past, I also, I went to Florida State, so I always had this interest in tropical meteorology as well. This is from a paper we published in GRL back in 2007, looking at how tropical cyclones produce rainfall in coastal regions. And again, we were using TRIM and other satellite data to kind of quantify rainfall production from the different categories of hurricanes and tropical storms along the US coast. And in that research, we found that, it's the tropical depressions and tropical storms that produce the most long-term flooding or drought sort of releasing rainfalls. It's, everyone sort of focuses on the Cat 3, Cat 4, and 5, but they're not the wettest of the storms. Let's see, we've got something in the chat here. So you're not seeing the full screen, Tim? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm not seeing the full screen.
Okay, I don't know what's going on there. Let me see if I can. I'll get out and try to.
I'm just seeing everybody's here.
You're seeing what?
Just everybody who's here. Amanda, Dave, Steve, Scott.
Okay, that's interesting. Let me try to share screen again. Is anybody else having that problem?
Yeah, I'm having issues. Not
Okay.
able to see the screen.
Okay,
Okay.
now it says, there we go, there we go, there we go.
Can you see it now?
I can
Yes, sir.
see it now.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's the start of the slide, and I'll kind of quickly come up to where I was. So I was talking about George Washington Carver, and then I
Right.
mentioned the B, and I showed the Love Building at Florida State.
Yep.
I mentioned some of my mentors there along the way, the TRIM mission, and so now I was talking about some of my science. So I mentioned the TRIM urban rainfall work. This slide on the left was talking about the rainfall quantification study, where we found that the lower end storms are the ones that tend to be the wettest over time, the ones that are most productive at breaking drought. But then on the right, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this concept of the brown ocean effect, but this is actually a concept that emerged from my research group, and I just see a typo there. That should be 2013, not 2023. One of my former students, Teresa Anderson, did her dissertation on this idea that certain storms, as they move over land, if their soils were wet enough, or if there's wetlands, they can maintain their intensity or even increase intensity. And we were really motivated by, I'm sure many of you in that area remember Aaron, that moved into Texas and then over Oklahoma and had a very well-defined eye over Oklahoma. And this is Tropical Storm Bill here in this figure. And we think that Tropical Storm Bill exhibited some similar brown ocean effect characteristics. More recently, I have hypothesized that Hurricane Ida, when Ida made landfall here in New Orleans, it sort of stalled a bit over these wetlands and maintained its intensity. There were clearly some synoptic or large scale things going on, but I think that the wetlands area also helped Ida with this brown ocean effect as well. Another area of research that I've really sort of been looking at is ideas about climate vulnerability. Benita KC, one of my students, published the first ever climate vulnerability index for the state of Georgia. She mixed sort of science observations of drought, flooding, heat waves, and so forth, and combined that with social vulnerability in metrics in various counties. And so you can see that we came up with this climate vulnerability index, and you can see the entire state of Georgia has become more climate vulnerable over time. So this is the 70s, the 70s, the 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s. But you also see that there are certain counties that are particularly vulnerable. Many of the metropolitan urban counties around Atlanta, Macon, Columbus, and so forth, many of our coastal counties of Georgia, and even some of our agriculturally intensive counties. And what we found in that study is those counties are vulnerable for different reasons. These counties are vulnerable because you have highly vulnerable populations exposed to heat wave and urban flooding. This county, suite of counties, is more related to inundation and flooding. And these counties down here exhibit more climate vulnerability because of reduction in work hours and due to drought frequency and intensity in these counties over the last 30 to 40 years. On the right, we extended that work, projected out climate vulnerability for every county in America out to the year 2040. And so what you're seeing here is the social vulnerability index for each of the counties in the United States. And that paper goes on to look at some of the counties that are most climate vulnerable because of who's living in those counties. So you can see many areas in Texas, for example, there are some highly vulnerable counties in terms of the types of demographic that lives there. Some very recent work that this is work that we've just published. We've been looking at sort of the racial distribution of the urban heat islands around Atlanta and other cities. So using satellite data, MODIS and Landsat, this is the urban heat island distribution in terms of land surface temperature around Atlanta. And this is based on sort of when we break it out in terms of who lives by race in those various clusters. And so what we're finding is in some cases, Black populations in Atlanta are living in some of the hottest parts of the urban heat island. And so we've actually proposed something called engineering cities for thermal justice. We're trying to propose some very radical new engineering concepts to engineer cities to kind of mitigate some of those disparities in terms of heat in cities. So that's just a snapshot of some of the science that I have done and continue to do over time here at the University of Georgia. As Amanda mentioned, I also find that broader engagement is very important, and I hope many of you within the AMS chapter there in Dallas-Fort Worth appreciate this idea that we need to be and I'll say more about this in a moment, we need to be end-to-end scientists. We need to do the best that we can do in our science fields, whether it's at the National Weather Service or at the University of Georgia or at NASA or NOAA, but we've got to broadly engage. And so that's why I served as president of the AMS. That's why I hosted Weather Geeks for the Weather Channel. I still host the podcast version of that, and I write for Forbes. Broader engagement is very important. We've got to have a paradigm shift in science at all levels. All of you that are in the audience or listening to me that went to grad school, you probably did a master's thesis or a PhD, and you were taught how to do the science. You were taught how to write papers and present at conferences and read the peer review literature, and that's all very important. But we can't stop there. We've got to train our professionals, whether it's in the Weather Service or in academia, to be able to testify before Congress, as you see me doing here in 2019, as I was testifying on the importance of the EPIC activity and compound weather disasters and extreme weather attribution and climate change. We need to teach students how to write and how to speak to the media and media training. These are things that are not a part of most meteorological or academic graduate school curricula. In fact, one of the things that Amanda will know for a fact that sort of sets our department apart here at the University of Georgia, look, we're fully AMS, NWS certified program as far as our undergraduate program. It meets all the math-based criteria for our students to leave as meteorologists, but because we're kind of co-located with a geography program, our students get exposed to GIS and geovisualization techniques and social sciences, a lot of the things the National Weather Service and other employers are looking for today. So we have to think about our profession from an end-to-end science perspective now, not just from the science perspective. And, as an African-American in the field of meteorology, there are only 2% of us in this field. I mean, I know that from the AMS stats from when I was president. I often think about the challenges, and I try to provoke, and I know some of you are on this call are probably Facebook friends or social media followers of mine, and I try to challenge us all to get out of our comfort zones when we're thinking about not only science, but just the broader issues that we face in society today. So I'm going to stop there. I just wanted to kind of give you a sample of some of the things I'm up to, but I actually, when I speak to groups like this, I always find it more interesting and useful to open it up for conversation. So why don't I do that now? Because I'm able to see who everyone is on. I see Tim, for example, and others. So why don't we just, take this opportunity to just have a free for all, and not even a Q&A as much as a free for all discussion. We're colleagues here. So.
Sure, I'll start it off.
Hey, Tim.
You touched on some really controversial points, and hey, I'm
Sure.
from Texas. We have science books that are under scrutiny by political motivators out there who want to strike climate change from the books and basically go crazy in terms of deleting the science. And this kind of brings up something that kind of concerns me, is the politics actually combating the science and trying to change the science or mute the science or divert the science. And now more than ever, I see this happening. It's not only in Texas, but other places where this is happening. It's like you say, engage, and that's really true. But how do we do that? How do we?
Yeah, I think, it's important. Yeah, you're right, Tim, because, we see some of that same thing going on in Georgia as well. One of the things that I say is the reason I say we have to engage is because I still think that there's this perception out there that, I can do my own research, or that the gray literature is just as credible as peer-reviewed science and so forth. And so I think because we've not been in these spaces on social media and in public engagement as the experts, I think people with disingenuous intent or with agendas have filled that void. And so now they've gotten the ear of a lot of people that make them sound a little bit more credible, whereas we sound like the sort of, the protectors of the conspiracy theory. So, I hope it's not too late. I'm seeing more engagement, but I feel like we sat on the sideline too long. And so because of that, and you know as well as I do how much social media now shapes and informs people on science. And I still have colleagues that tell me I don't do that social media, Twitter stuff or Facebook. I don't do that new stuff. It's not, well, first of all, it's not new. And second of all, and I've got all kind of studies and statistics that show that that's where people are getting their science information from.
Sure.
So if Tim Marshall's not there talking about tornado structure and infrastructure damage, and you got somebody out there that's not as the experienced expert you are, or Amanda Schroeder's not out there talking about hydrometeorological processes, and they're getting it from a YouTuber. I mean, that those, as disturbing as it is, those YouTubers and gray literature and things like that reach far more people than BAMs.
Absolutely, they do. And so we're seeing some real premises being put forth, like the science is wrong, and
yes,
that you're having the wool pulled over your eyes on climate change. It's stuff like that is going on. And you're right, there are millions of people on social media, and there's this anti-science movement that's actually growing. And But
here's the good news, though. It feels like it's growing, Tim, but I was just reading some things the other day that suggest it's not as big as we think it is. Like, for example, the Yale, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Yale 6 Americas study that the Yale Climate Communication Group does. If you're not familiar with that, take a look at it, because they query the U.S. population every year, and they've got some really interesting statistics that bore down at every county level. And one of the 6 Americas groups is what's called the dismissive crowd. And that crowd used to be about 13% of their sample. They've been doing this for like 20 years. It's down to 7%. But the problem is that 7% is really loud on Twitter, or the ones writing the op-eds, or your uncle at Thanksgiving dinner. And so it just feels like they're in our face. But so on the one hand, there are some data that suggests that at least on that matter, we've gained some traction. Plus, I think nature's convincing people too. I think that's a powerful convincer and motivator. But I do share your concern about the narratives that are being created. And in fact, I wrote a Forbes article on this a few months ago, because I was watching what was happening with some of the textbooks and some of the other things that are trying to be banned. I was like, what's next? Am I not going to be able to teach about climate change, Milankovitch cycles, so forth and so on, because someone doesn't want their child to learn about it? That's a big problem. Yeah. That is a huge problem. And, that's an ideological narrative. And look, I don't care what your politics. I don't care whether you're conservative. I don't care if you're liberal, Democrat, or Republican. There are some things that it's just scholarship. It's not controversy.
Yeah, and then of course in Texas we have this alternative energy movement, which is gaining some ground. But then there's a lot of misinformation about that. There are a lot of people buying Teslas because Tesla's plant, is going to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be in there.
And it's like, well, wait a minute now. Where do those batteries come from? Well, you have to mine that mineral to come out, and then you got to charge it up with your electrical service, which actually comes from burning coal. So it's like, really, are Teslas really that?
Well, I have to say, I've got it. I have an EV, so I'm on the EV kick, but I don't have a Tesla. I have a Ford, but I have a Mach-E. Okay. But I've written an article sort of on all of that as well. I mean, on the power, on the point I make about the power, at least it's definitely still burning fossil fuels, but at least it's domestic fossil fuel because it's coal. So at least it's a little closer to the source. So that's one sort of positive. But the other really nice thing about the program here, at least that we have with Georgia Power, as far as Southern Company, they have something called an EV rate. And so they try to leverage renewables as a part of your power source. And they also modify your rate depending on your usage, because they know you have an EV. So I've actually found that my power bill has gone down since I've had it. So the battery issue is still a problem, but I think it's when we're talking about first, second, third order problems, to me, it's a second and third order problem compared to the broader climate change problem from fossil fuels. So I'm willing to bite the bullet on that one a little bit for the greater good that I think I'm getting from the EV. But I think the bigger issues I have with the EV right now is the infrastructure, because you still have access issues where, certain populations and marginal communities don't have access to EVs, charging stations. If you live in an apartment complex, you can't charge your EVs. So there are a lot of access and equity issues right now. But the good news, though, and I wrote an article about this in Forbes, when, someone kind of poo-pooed me on Twitter when I, said that, something about an EV. He's like, oh, how elitist you are for talking about your EV. And I actually flipped that narrative. And I said, actually, I think EVs are a way to, equalize things. So if I'm a mother on a fixed income and I'm having to worry about $6 a gallon gas right now, and the whims of the fossil fuel economy, I think an EV could certainly sort of, create a lot of sort of cushion on her budget, household budget. Now, we're not there yet because there's still access issues and so forth.
And of course, Texas, we have a lot of wind turbines and they're going up by the thousands here.
Yes.
And I'm all for a wind power, but again, there's pros and cons there. To make those blades and towers requires lots of energy to do. And then to keep them moving requires oil, which of course keeps the turbines spinning. So it's like there's pros and cons there as well. And then
but they look better than oil derricks, though.
Yeah, they do.
I think they're much more interesting to look at.
Weather Service has issues with them because I see them on the radar all the time. And when a storm goes into that, then that's a real problem.
Yeah, I think I
alias that.
I think I see. Yeah, I see you can see. I see the radar returns on those turbines quite often up in the, particularly up in the sort of Great Plains Midwest region. But yeah, I think there's certainly pros and cons of all of the sources. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do them. I just think we got to figure out technology to make them better. Yeah. But I still argue that they look a lot more majestic than those derricks going up and down as I'm driving to Texas. Those things are actually pretty hideous.
They're getting quite large. We saw down in the Port Isabel area a couple of weeks ago, 80-meter long blades. 80-meter long blades. Yep. So it takes a 500-foot tower. They're thinking about offshore. They're shipping them overseas. I mean, this is amazing to think of something that gigantic out there.
Oh, I know. I'd be interested because I've been on certain interstates and I see them driving by me on these big long trucks sometimes. So I was like, how do you transport those things? Here in Georgia, I've got a guy who's in the Warnell School of Forestry here, and he does wood pellet research. And so he's talking about, like in Europe right now, they're getting a lot of their energy from wood pellets, and the state of Georgia is a big producer of those. If you go to Savannah and look at these big gigantic ships going down a river, most of them are loaded with wood pellets headed to Europe.
Wow. Yeah.
So I know you only have a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I'll take it. If there's one or more question, I'll take it.
So I have a question. It's not specifically weather and climate related, but all of the things that you're successfully able to do, which seeming simultaneously, do you have any suggestions or tips on how to balance everything so well between?
Well, sure. Yeah, I do. I have a couple. Well, one is set boundaries. You notice I told you I had a hard out at 30 minutes. I mean, that's something that I do live by. I set boundaries. I got elected to the National Academies recently, and they wanted to have a meeting I think you may have seen me post this about, they wanted to have like a meeting on Saturday, like a Zoom on Saturday. I was like, I don't do meetings on Saturday. Because AAU, my daughter plays volleyball. I'm in a tournament somewhere. So it's important to set very clear boundaries in your career. I mean, I've done that all my life. I've never been that person in the lab till 10 o'clock at night or so forth. I've just never done that. And I've had success. The other thing is I have a very sort of clear understandings of what I do best during a given day. Like certain hours I know I write best. Certain hours I know I read the literature better. Certain hours I take my calls. So I kind of stick to that. As opposed to sort of like waking up and saying, okay, what am I going to do today? I kind of know the things that I do best, and so I can optimize my day. So I think optimization of your sort of daily work rhythm, setting clear boundaries, and honestly, as I've gotten older in my career, just saying no. So thank you, Amanda. I think that's probably where I need to jump off. I hear my son actually, and Anderson, I just heard him come down. So thank you all. Good talking to you, Tim. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so Dave, what's the best way to handle as far as the elections go? Because I know that Greg couldn't be on, but he was still interested in maintaining VP status unless someone else was interested in running against him. I'm obviously stepping down as president. We do have someone to be nominated.
If I were you, Amanda, I would just start out with nominations and start out with the president, which I believe we have somebody to nominate. So start with that and just work through it that way. He can take over once that voting is done if he wants. And I think that's the way we've done it in the past.
All right. Well, I will open the nominations for president then.
I will go ahead and I will go ahead and nominate Stephen since he's spoken about it. And Stephen, if that's okay with you, I'll nominate you if that's acceptable, and hopefully we'll get a second.
I'll second.
Okay.
There we go.
Is there anyone else nominated? Going once, going twice? Okay. So with that, I will go ahead and hold. All those in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed, say nay. All right, well, there you go. Now it's Steve. I will pass it on to him.
Thank you,
Okay.
Amanda.
Well, that happened really quick. So next up is going to be vice president, and when they said that Greg couldn't be on the call, but I guess he's running unopposed, so I'm assuming that he will maintain the status. Forgive me, I don't know everyone's officer position. So Dave, I believe you are the secretary or treasurer.
Secretary.
Okay. I am assuming that no one else is being nominated for that position. So.
And I'm
congrats.
happy to continue. And then Stanley is the treasurer.
And Stanley's treasurer, and I don't think he made the call.
He's the CACTU. I believe it's his wife.
Okay.
But he's on the call. He just can't speak because of the setup he is, I think. Unless Stanley, if you want to say something, but I think it's him.
Oh,
Yeah,
can you hear me?
There you are. Hey, Stanley.
Yeah. Oh, okay. You can hear me.
Yes,
sir.
Yeah, I'll run.
All right. Let's see here. Hearing no other nominations, Stanley, it's yours again. So,
All right.
all right, we have a full crew for next year. So, if I remember right, we kick off again in September. I will coordinate with you all here on what to do for the coming year. I know everything's been remote because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll work on trying to get back to some in-person meetings. I do have thoughts about speakers along the way. Some will hopefully be within the DFW area. Some will be from other locations, if I could make that happen. And we'll go from there from other logistics.
thanks, Steve. And Steve, I think you shared information about you in an email, but if there's something else, when I send out a follow-up to the meeting, I'll of course give more information about you. But if there's something else you want to share in that email, just send it to me or to the same people you did before. So
okay. Yeah, I forgot who I sent it to here. I'm like eyeballing another computer.
You pick. Yeah, you're fine. I just, in case you wanted something else in the email, and it'll probably be the last email until we have another meeting next September. Is that when we go? I think.
Yeah. Yes.
I just didn't know if you want me to say anything quick now about myself before.
Yeah,
then.
if you want, I was just thinking there's about 8 people on, well, including us, but yeah, if you want to kind of introduce yourself to those that are on the meeting, that would be nice.
Yeah. So I'm just random guy apparently who just showed up last year, and here I am now running the show. I actually I work for the University of Oklahoma at CIWRO. I'm actually live in the Fort Worth area, but I'm actually here in Norman, Oklahoma right now for work. So I'll head back to Texas tomorrow evening. I've been with OU for 13 years. I've spent the first 5 years with training division with the National Weather Service. I spent the last 8 years and currently with the National Severe Storms Laboratory. So I do research and development for precipitation, gauges, flash flooding, and transition of products to operations with the National Weather Service. Before that, I got both my degrees at Florida State University. So Dr. Shepard said there's others around. Well, here's one of them. I'm an active member with both the AMS and the NWA, and like a number of meteorologists, it was hooked at an early age. I was pretty much sold by time Hurricane Andrew happened in 1992. I was 8, so meteorology has always been in my blood. So it's glad to be part of the crew and help continue the chapter along.
Well, I, for one, want to thank you for volunteering. We really appreciate Amanda stepping in too. She really brought us back to life the last years, so we appreciate that as well. And I know Greg expressed that in some email as well. So I wanted to be sure and share that we sure appreciate it.
Yes, Amanda, we appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And could you also send me the speaker's address, and I'll send him a gift card?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, Stephen, what we do is we send the speakers a $25 Amazon gift card.
That works. That's great.
Yeah. And sometime when you're here in Fort Worth, let me know and we'll get together and I get you on the account for the chapter.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, right now the only people on it are me and Skip Ely. So if something happens to either one of us, I don't know how you're going to get the money.
And don't go there. I was involved with a local group that had some money in the bank, and all of the officers went away in various reasons, and so the bank money was no longer available. So yeah, and I'll send you an email and with my phone number and my address and everything.
Okay, that sounds good. And yeah, I've gotten familiar with a few of the details on how all this works, and motion sensor lights. Yeah, it's nice if I don't move for like 20 minutes, it goes out. They think no one's here. Yeah, so I'm familiar. I've gotten familiar with a few of the things that goes on. I know that they used to be in person in the past. We'll try and we'll see if we can get that up and running again. I know I have to talk with management about that. And I know there was previous work with science fairs. I'm sure we can get that involvement back on. And I know there's a webpage, and we'll figure out a few other things in time.
Yep, look forward to it.
Yes.
I was just thinking when your lights went out, I thought, yeah, when that happened to me last time during the meeting, I'd lost like for about an hour.
Yeah.
Well, at least it's not like 0 degrees outside and buried in snow and everything shut down, because I don't think we need that again. So anything else we need to discuss, or?
No, I'll send you a treasurer's report via email, so you know how much money we have in the bank.
Okay, I appreciate it. So
And I'll be updating the web page as well, and include you on the mailing list administration group. So I'll take care of that. So.
All right, sounds great. I look forward to coordinating with you all on this.
All right.
All right, so having gotten all the chapter business out of the way, we shall hereby adjourn this meeting for tonight and look forward to seeing you all again in September. And for you guys, we'll look forward to coordinating with you all soon.
You bet.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone.
You bet. Happy summer.
Yeah.
Stay
Yeah,
Cool.
Stanley.
cool.
Here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
stay cool.
See you, Amanda. I guess she's already dropped off. Bye, everyone. I'm going to end it. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, bye-bye.